decision you avoided this year is still on your record. You made a lot of decisions this year. Hiring decisions, budget decisions, decisions about who gets the stretch assignment and who doesn't. You probably remember most of them. But the ones that shaped your team the most, you likely don't remember at all, because you didn't make them. You just let time pass, and time made them for you. That's not inaction. That's a decision with consequences you didn't choose and can't take credit for. The default decision. It doesn't feel like a choice. That's what makes it the most dangerous kind you make. Premise. Most managers think of a decision as a moment, a meeting, a conversation, a sign-off, something discrete, something you can point to. Reframe. That framing is wrong, and it's costing you more than you know. A decision is not a moment. A decision is a commitment to a direction, and if you don't make it, the situation makes it for you, usually in the direction of least resistance, which is almost never the direction you would have chosen. The longer you wait, the more the default hardens. What started as, "I'll revisit this next week," becomes the operating reality of your team 6 months later. The hidden cost isn't just the suboptimal outcome. It's that your team reads your delay as a signal. They don't see a thoughtful leader taking time. They see the absence of a call, and they fill that absence with their own interpretation. Usually the most anxious one available, the underperformer who hasn't been addressed. Your team assumes you're fine with the performance. The role that's been ambiguous for 3 months? They've each privately decided what it means, and those private decisions are now in conflict. You didn't choose any of those outcomes, but you own them. Move. Start treating delay as a decision, because it is. When you're sitting on something, name it explicitly to yourself. What is the current trajectory if nothing changes? If you can live with that trajectory, you've made a conscious choice to let it run. If you can't, you no longer have the luxury of calling it pending. The shift isn't about moving faster. It's about being honest that you're already moving, just without your hands on the wheel. Premise. There's a specific category of default decision that's harder to see because it hides inside your calendar. The meetings you keep scheduling, the ones you stopped scheduling, the one-on-ones that drifted from weekly to bi-weekly to when there's something to talk about. Reframe. Your calendar is not an administrative document. It's a map of your actual priorities, not the ones you'd write down, but the ones your behavior reveals. And the defaults in your calendar accumulate into a management philosophy that you never consciously chose. The skip level you keep meaning to schedule. The strategic conversation you've been deferring because there's always something more urgent. The direct report whose development plan you drafted in Q1 and haven't opened since. None of those feel like decisions. They feel like things you haven't gotten to yet. But your team isn't experiencing them as deferrals. They're experiencing them as answers. This is the second-order problem. The first-order problem is that the work isn't getting done. The second-order problem is that your team is calibrating their own ambition to match what they perceive as yours. If you're not creating space for their development, the sharpest people on your team quietly stop expecting it. They stop asking, and eventually, they stop staying. Move. Audit your calendar for the last 60 days. Not what's scheduled, but what's absent. Look for the conversations that should be recurring and aren't. The work that matters most rarely creates its own urgency. It waits for you to protect time for it. If it's not on the calendar, you've already decided it's not a priority. The question is whether you meant to decide that. Premise. The most consequential default decisions aren't about tasks or meetings. They're about people, specifically about the version of someone you're willing to hold them to. Reframe. Every person on your team is operating against a standard. Some of that standard is explicit: goals, metrics, defined expectations. but a large portion of it is implicit, and it's being set constantly, in real time, by what you respond to and what you let pass. When someone cuts a corner and you notice but say nothing, you've just moved the line. When someone dominates a meeting and you let it run, you've set a norm. When someone delivers mediocre work and you accept it because the timeline is tight, you've told them, and everyone watching, what adequate looks like here. The paradox is this: most managers think they're being flexible. They're reading the room, choosing their battles, not making everything a confrontation. And that's true. But flexibility applied without intention doesn't produce a resilient team. It produces a team that has learned to read your tolerance instead of your standard. They're not working to the goal. They're working to the edge of what you'll accept. And that edge keeps moving because you keep letting it. You didn't lower the bar in one moment. You lowered it in 40 small ones, none of which felt like a decision. Move. The shift here is not about becoming more confrontational. It's about naming what you're doing when you choose to let something go. If you're consciously deciding a moment isn't worth addressing, fine. That's a real call. But if you're letting it pass because it's uncomfortable, or because you're tired, or because you're hoping it self-corrects, that's a default. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a leader who manages standards and one who slowly inherits whatever standard their team sets for them. 3 blocks, 3 different angles. But they're all the same problem. You are making calls every day that you don't recognize as calls. The trajectory you don't redirect. The time you don't protect. The standard you don't hold. None of it feels like a decision in the moment. All of it looks like one in hindsight. Leadership isn't just what you choose. It's what you allow to be chosen for you, and whether you know the difference.